Hello, everyone. I'm Kendrick Turner, editor-in-chief, founder, manager of Icon to Even Freud, a community of individuals who talk philosophically about personality disorders. It's possible that you came across this website because you are a clinician or an individual or friend or family of someone that has a personality disorder. So we're here to talk about these philosophical conceptualizations and treatment modalities. I owe a lot of this subject to Brent Slife, one of my undergraduate professors at Brigham Young University. I think everyone should check him out. He's a very deep thinker. He is the editor-in-chief of Theoretical Psychology, an academic journal. And he's published a lot of very well thought out arguments, such as this book, Time and Psychological Explanation. Dr. Slife's thesis of this book is essentially that our assumptions of time as clinicians influence our theoretical framework, which influence the hidden implications of them. He proposes that Newtonian time took over the contemporary United States and Western culture at the advent of the invention of the watch. Before then, people just kind of looked at the sun. You would have never known that time was passing besides looking at the sun or seeing yourself age. Nowadays, we have the clock, and it controls when we eat, when we sleep, when we wake up, and for us to meet deadlines such as this one. And I apologize because my computer is not working at the moment. Anyways, the advent of the watch, if you think about it, if you think of time in that manner, you think of it as linear. We think of things happening in the past, things happening in the present, and in the future. And this is Newton's influence, and you see that in his metaphysic. And he talks about it in his physics. If you roll a marble, the marble in the past moving towards the future hits the other one. Now, there are many modalities of therapy and theory that center around this assumption. And he proposed that most of these were influenced by the philosopher John Locke. He calls these models Lockean models of time. Now, if we think back and you refer to my blog post about Aristotelian causality, we know that a linear past, present, future would follow a very efficient causal schema, for lack of a better term, and material causal, because something does not come out of nothing. An efficient cause would be something that a behaviorist might look at. I am what I am today due to the reinforcements, awards, and punishments that I received growing up. Now, there are very, very, very deep hidden assumptions here. One is that the past stays in the past. It's not something that you can change. It also means that your future is set in stone as well, because if the past influences you, you're a product of what's happening to you in the present, then where's the control? And this is a hidden assumption of behaviorism. This is where the existentialists and existential clinicians and humanist clinicians such as Carl Rogers, Irv Yalom, and the like come in, and they're like, no. You do that, you have those assumptions, then you lose a giant part of what it means to be human, and many of the constructs that we think of, such as love, cease to exist. Take, for example, the cognitive behavioral psychologist or cognitive psychologist, psychological theory that postulates that our brains are made up of mental hardware and software. We're born with the hardware that we need to do things, and the software pretty much runs the program. Now, the existentialists and the humanists would respond and say, well, how has change actually happened then? Are you really increasing their free will? Because all you're doing is just reprogramming. And if someone were to come into contact with something in the environment, that causes another program to happen, then you should expect that person back in your office. In addition, you think about deeply enough and you come to conclude that a construct such as love ceases to be as meaningful if it's simply a software program that's running. And the existentialist and humanist would say that the behaviorist, the cognitivist, are not as deeply rooted in the teleological or the final cause, the purpose behind it. The real change happens in the purpose, the meaningful change. The ability to ascribe meaning to any given experience is something that makes us all uniquely human. And that was an idea proposed by Immanuel Kant, for whom this website is named after. They propose that the past, present, and future are all co-occurring. How I think about the past now changes the past meaning, and what I do now changes the future. And we see these themes. Now the cognitivist and the behaviorist would respond and say, well, yes, maybe, but, not really. How are you going to tell someone who's homeless that they have the ability to choose? And it's a valid question, I believe. And all of this will influence how the clinician or therapist interacts with and approaches the therapy and counseling with the client. The hidden assumptions of which carry deep, deep, deep weight. If I am a therapist who is attempting to do ABC worksheets with a client who is suffering from borderline personality disorder, I'm often using terminology such as triggers, meaning that once that individual, the borderline, comes into contact with a stimulus that sets off a software program in their brain, and then that elicits an output which is unstable. We see that in the relationship patterns of borderlines. Someone who's obsessive compulsive with an obsessive compulsive personality, that's what we would see. We'd ask them, okay, you come into contact with something you fall short of, and you have this output of wanting to put more pressure on yourself. And the existentialists and the humanists don't necessarily have a problem with that. What they have a problem with is that you take away the meaning if you view things in that light. The man or woman who is cleaning constantly and holding themselves to long hours at work is doing so because of an past-driven drive. And that's not meaningful. If I am myself showing love to my wife, and I'm under the assumption that I'm in the cognitive framework, I'm simply doing an output. Love ceases to be love. And that can be problematic. And the flip side could be problematic as well. Thinking about these terms and thinking about what Dr. Slife proposed. Oh, and one more thing. He also proposed that there were mixed models of theory and approaches to psychological treatment, and one of such was the psychoanalytic framework, meaning that the past does carry a great influence on the person's present. We see that in the stages, Oedipus complex, phallic stage, and all of that. However, they also believed in discontinuous change, which occurs when the libido pushes through a barrier and you reach your appropriate age of development. And that can happen overnight. It doesn't necessarily happen gradually. It's not a past-driven mechanism of change. I can get more into that in the future because I'm finding a lot of interesting stuff about the psychoanalysts, in particular the ones who take after Jung and the ones who take after Lacan. Carl Jung being a heavy German influence, and Jacques Lacan, hope I did not pronounce that wrong, being a heavy French influence. So if you yourself are seeking treatment, it might be a good idea to read up on the approach that the counselor you're seeing is taking and some of the hidden assumptions behind that. If it lines up with you, great. If it doesn't, maybe look for a different approach to it. I myself am very biased towards the existential approach, very much in the vein of Man's Search for Meaning. What do y'all think? Let me know. Feel free to comment. Feel free to blog about, contact me. And until next time, hopefully my equipment is working and hopefully I am not so doggone tired. Over and out.